Anaheim 1 is just a few days away, and the kickoff of the 2025 Monster Energy AMA Supercross Championship has us with a few questions, and we're going to try to answer one of them today. Who the heck is racing which coast in the 250 class? Welcome back to VitalMX. I'm your host, Mike Lindsay, and yes, today we're going to try to answer a fairly obvious question, but again, all the teams slowly put out these PRs. You see stuff on Instagram, on social channels of riders saying what coast. We're going to wrap it up into one nice package here for you guys. So who is racing which region? We're going to go through all the major teams. There are some maybe stragglers we won't get to, but let's talk about the important ones, the ones that you guys are curious about. Starting off with the Monster Energy Yamaha Star Racing Squad. They actually had one of the earliest announcements from a team, but also one of the last-minute switches. As we know from good sources, they actually pretty heavily swapped what coast they originally thought their riders were going to run. So West Coast will be Hayden Deegan, along with Michael Mosiman and rookie Cole Davies. The Kiwi was basically originally supposed to be in Futures, and then they were talking about bumping him to East, and now he's just racing West Coast. He will also be number 100, so that's pretty exciting. So they have a three-man squad on the West. That leaves them with four riders for East Coast, with Nate Thrasher, Daxton Bennick, Max Anstey, and Pierce Brown. Next up is the Monster Energy Pro Circuit Kawasaki squad. They are the latest team to announce their coast, but also one of the most, in a sense, obvious. They're running Garrett Marchbanks and Levi Kitchen on the West Coast, and on the East Coast, they are running Seth Hamaker, Cameron McAdoo, and Ty Masterpool. Realistically, the only deciding point here originally was between Cameron and Levi for West-East. They have decided the Kitchen will race West alongside Garrett Marchbanks. East Coast decisions aren't surprising. McAdoo supposedly had a small crash this offseason, was off the bike maybe for a week or two. Seth Hamaker's coming from a pretty long layoff and injury, so the extra time would be beneficial for him to prep. And Ty Masterpool also spent the offseason majorly sick. So again, those guys being pushed East Coast is not surprising. A little bit of news in there is Seth Hamaker has made the move to the Dog Pound, to the Lawrence compound, training back east. Now, what about Drew Adams? Interesting one. He is basically the team's fill-in rider this year. We know he will line up at some point. There's a decent chance he could line up for East Coast if somebody on the team is injured, or even West if somebody gets injured. Either way, Drew technically does not have a coast yet, but we would not be shocked to see him at some point in Supercross. At this point, it's basically a given. Next up is the Triumph Racing Factory team, which actually just put out a press release to update their lineup. Originally, they were going to be taking Jordan Smith and Austin Faulkner West Coast Racing, which led us to believe there might be an injury from Jalik Swoll, as we had originally heard Smith and Swoll would be set for West. Yes, it has turned out that Swoll has an Achilles injury. As we know, that's a quite severe injury in our sport and will take him out for quite a bit of time. So they've decided to shuffle their lineup and give themselves a better chance at being competitive on both coasts for wins and podiums. This puts them with Jordan Smith and Styles Robertson on West Coast, while Austin Faulkner has been moved to East Coast with an unnamed second rider yet. It is unknown if they will go racing with just Faulkner on East, if there is some timetable that is available for Swoll's return, or if there will be a fill-in. Of course, Triumph has Mikel Harrup as a development and test rider right now, who potentially, with a couple weeks on Supercross, could race the East region, but we will see. For now, Jordan Smith and Styles Robertson will line up at A1. Team HRC Honda Progressive is another obvious one. They have lined up Joe Shimoda for the West Coast, albeit Joe has also moved from living on the West Coast in Corona, California, to also moving to Florida and is now training at the Moto Sandbox, but he is still racing the West region. Chance Hymas will take on the East region. Again, Chance just barely got back on Supercross maybe about 2 to 3 weeks ago. I think only about 2. From his layoff from a knee surgery caused by an injury, of course, that we saw during the end of the Pro Motocross Championship that he tried to kind of race through SMX. So very locked-in team, kind of obvious. Then we move on to the Red Bull KTM Factory Racing squad. No issues here with injury, but just very straightforward. Julien Bellemare is based on the West Coast, wants to race West Coast, and has been back on the bike and training since pretty much right after SMX ended, so he will take on the West region, while Tom Vial will get to defend his number 1 plate on the East region. He had a little bit longer layoff after Motocross of Nations, a little bit of recovery time, so he is going to take on the East and get those extra couple weeks of prep and run the number 1 plate. The Rockstar Energy husqvarna squad only has one 250 rider, and that is RJ Hampshire. And here's an interesting one. RJ Hampshire will be at the opening day press conference this weekend for A1. Does that mean he's racing West Coast? No, he sadly will not be defending his number one plate. He's only been back on Supercross since, I believe, a couple days after Christmas. Although, you know, RJ, if he could have made it happen, he would have. I wouldn't ever count him out switching, but don't be too shocked when you see him at A1 the press conference. But from what we know, that means he will still be racing the East region due to just needing those laps, needing that time to log it in. So sadly, we will not see the number one on track on East Coast. RJ will have to divert to his normal 24 when he's racing the East region this year. As for the Rockstar Energy Gasgas Factory Racing Squad, another one that had a little bit of a default due to injury, Ryder DeFrancesco is West Coast based and going to race the West region. Casey Cochran got injured this offseason and will be pushed to the East region, albeit we think maybe making East region might even be, the start of it might be a little bit of a stretch for him. We'll have to see. So again, Ryder D on West and Casey Cochran East for the newly formed Rockstar Gasgas Squad. Moving into some of the factory-supported teams in the sport, we have the Phoenix Honda Racing Squad. They will be taking Gavin Towers and Evan Ferry racing on the West Coast, while Nick Romano and Colin Park will be heading east for the team. As for the Muck-Off FXR clubMX Yamaha team, they always have a mouthful. I got to remember, they picked up a new sponsor with First Form this year. I had to remember if that was in the name of the team, but it is not. They have Cody Schock and Jet Reynolds racing the West Coast. Also talking a little bit about delay prep that naturalizes their East Coast team to Max Volan, who's coming off a major injury. It's kind of famous at this point that he is racing with a handbrake because he has so little movement in his foot at this point, in his right foot. So he is racing East. You also have Mark Finnis, who was brought kind of back to the team late into the offseason of decisions. He's racing East. They were supposed to have Devin Sivenson on East, but he has broken basically his arm or wrist, and he is being replaced for East Coast by Australian racer Reed Taylor, which if you watch the WSX rounds, Reed Taylor had a couple of really good races in that series. So they have a 2-man West and a 3-man East team. Also speaking of Yamaha teams is the Toyota of Redlands BarX Yamaha squad. They were prior the Suzuki 250 team. Sadly, there is, as of right now, no Suzuki 250, factory supported squad for this next year. BarX switched and they haven't named a successor to that program. So with BarX going Yamaha, what are they doing? They actually aren't completely sure as of last week. They are racing West Coast. There is a chance they move east due to the fact they have some riders with some injuries and health issues. They'd like to get some seat time on the east. Those two being Dylan Schwartz and Derek Drake. Derek Drake has figured out that he has Lyme disease after multiple heart surgeries, all kinds of health issues, that poor guy. Dylan Schwartz also has a minor wrist injury of sorts. He will miss the opening rounds. Are hoping to go East Coast with those two. So West will be Anthony Bourdon, the Frenchman, alongside Australian racer Brad West. Talking about a few teams now that are one coast only, we have the AEO KTM Power Sports Racing Squad. All three of their riders will be West Coast. That is Lux Turner, Talon Hawkins, and Avery Long. We also have the Heartbeat Hot Sauce Solitaire Yamaha team, which is also a West Coast only team. They will have Derek Kelly, Robbie Wageman, and Cole Thompson, albeit Wageman had a really bad wrist injury a couple weeks ago. I don't think he will be racing Supercross at all this season, potentially. That would leave the squad up to Cole Thompson and Derek Kelly for the most part. Another multi-coast team is the Partzilla BarX Kawasaki squad, which will be racing West Coast with one 250 rider, that being Hunter Yoder, while on the East Coast, they will have Jack Chambers alongside Preston Baseplug. Another East Coast only operation in terms of their 250 division is the, well, I actually don't know what to call them, the Firepower Honda team, which is no longer title sponsored by Firepower. They actually have a really exciting announcement coming up for Friday, big new title sponsor. We can't post that one here, sadly, but they will have Carson Mumford racing the East Division, so they have a one-man team there because they are fielding multiple riders in the 450 class, but Carson is their sole 250 East Division rider. On the theme of Honda teams, what about Moto Concepts Honda? Well, they're a little busy racing Arena Cross and World Supercross as of late, but we do believe they will be racing the majority of the West Supercross rounds. It looks like Noah Viney will be taking on 250 West for him. We believe that Vince Freeze will be staying in the 450 class, so they should only have a one-man effort in 250s. A program that we're never quite sure about until they show up on race day, the Rock River Gizmos Mods Yamaha program. We do know that they are taking Marshall Welton and TJ Albright racing on the West Division for 250s. 250 East, the only one we're quite sure of right now is Bryce Shelley. Dirt Bike Depot WMR KTM is Jace Kessler, Crockett Myers, Gage Linville, and Marcus Phelps, all on 250 East. And then there's also the host Grindstone Kawasaki squad, which will be Dylan Walsh and Max Sanford on 250 West. One other new team that has popped up on the block is the Michaels Reno Powersports Stan Benson Racing Husqvarna team. They are racing both coasts. They will have Slade Varola and Brock Bennett on 250 West, and they were set to have Harry Koulos and Dane Briggs on East Coast, albeit Briggs has not qualified for a Supercross license yet. Do not know for sure if he will make East. Harry Koulos for sure is in East, so we wouldn't be surprised if the team does another rider. But again, everybody's favorite Estonian that came over and killed it in outdoors last year, Harry Koulos, has a full year ride with this team. There's a few other smaller programs, of course, we don't have a complete lock on, but that is the majority of all the big players, plus a little touch on some of the smaller teams. Any surprises here? Any thoughts about each region, who the favorites are, who's going to be the standout, the surprises, or who's even going to be the disappointment? Throw it in the comments section below. And as always, thanks for watching and checking out all the news here on BarX.